Y2K was 20 years ago. What are your best Y2K stories? I lived overseas and was watching the news with family and friends on the Armed Forces Network. The newscast did the countdown and then at 1 they cut the feed and it went to static. There were several gasps and then about 5 seconds later the feed came back and the newscast shouted, "Just kidding. Happy New Year." I thought it was pretty clever. I was at a big house party and the owner's GF at the time threw the main breaker to the house at midnight. Since this was out of town and back in the woods a bit, this resulted in almost total darkness and amp. Quiet except for the stars and amp, critters and everyone freaking out a little bit. She flipped it back on after about 5-10 am. We all thought it was pretty funny, with the exception of the one guy that was on a little bit more of some substances than others there and lost his marbles for a while. He ended up running off in the woods for a few hours but eventually made it back to the house asking if the world was alright. Good times. My friend's dad did the same thing to us at the night party we had at his house. He actually gave us a few seconds after the ball dropped to remark, "Well, looks like nothing happened." Then boom, everything goes dark. We all about power pants. Had a good laugh when he flipped the power back on after a minute and strolled into the room wearing a shit-eating grin. No drug-induced woodsman, though, so your story has mine beat. I was managing the department in a state agency, and were under enormous pressure to prevent any Y2K problems. On NY day I went to work before dawn and tested everything before the exec director arrived. Relieved that everything was working okay, we went to IHOP for a celebratory breakfast. The IHOP bill was date-timed stamped 32 December 1999. I would have framed that receipt. My favorite thing was cemetery headstones that were not Y2K compliant. People had headstones made before they died with the 19 pre-engraved, planning on filling in the next 2 digits when the time came. Oops, they kept living. OMG, I forgot about stuff like that. I had order forms at work I had to scribble out the 19 on until we ran out. I worked in it at one of the Dow Industrial Company's headquarters, and I spent a high percentage of 1999 doing Y2K tests on every single computer, server, printer, fax machine and, I'm pretty sure, coffee maker. No problems, and no signs of problems. That year was a waste of my life. I did the same, minus the Dow Industrial part, checked and certified systems, installed some patches from vendors or in-house teams, rechecked and recertified. By December 1999 we all were really done with it all. Only to need to come in on January the 1st, because some upper echelon really wanted some last checks done after the fact. As soon as I stepped into the building lobby I saw a colleague sitting on one of the benches clutching their belly and laughing hard, tears in their eyes, pointing at the big digital signage board, wishing everyone a happy new 19,100. In October, my dad finished off the spam he purchased for Y2K. He bought 12 cases of it because it was super cheap leading up to Y2K and he just really enjoys spam. I am honestly impressed at the dedication of someone to eat 288 cans of spam over 20 years. 14 cans of spam a year seems relatively reasonable if you like spam. You could easily go through 14 cans of spam a year, even if you only eat it once or twice a week. Pan-fried spam on rice, spam egg cheese sandwich, cubed spam on a salad, grilled spam burger. Sorry, my mother is Korean, and Koreans take their spam very seriously. Not even joking, Korean markets sell black label spam, which is literally luxury spam. My mother was one of those folks that was convinced that everything was going to implode for Y2K. She thought that it would be like a post-apocalyptic nightmare, no food at the stores, banks shut down, people rioting, the whole 9 yards. She desperately tried to convince me, my 2 brothers, and all of our families to come to her place in the country and bunker down for the duration. Of course, none of us were going for that, but we did keep in touch so that she didn't worry too much. Never forget the phone call where she explained that she had stockpiled canned goods, bought a generator, and bought a milk cow. The cow was so that the kids would have milk since there obviously wouldn't be any at the store after all commerce broke down. SHM. Her heart was in the right place, but really, mom? A milk cow? None of the kids were even babies that would need milk. She ended up selling the cow shortly after. Nothing happened. We still laugh about the Y2K milk cow. My dad was a systems analyst, working for what was then a major UK high street retailer based in Liverpool, who had their own in-house EPIS system that my dad worked on. His department learned of the Y2K issue at a conference in 94 or 95, and had the system 90% compliant by 1998, but the management were very cautious. Everything was tested and retested, and dad was on call throughout December 99, with incredibly generous rates. The office was at the Albert Dock, and dad was called on New Year's Eve as a precaution. So we got to watch the fireworks over the Mersey from the top floor where dad's office was. Dad reckons the extra pay, after tax, amounted to about 6 weeks' pay. I was 8 during the Y2K craze, growing up in a small town, about 5,000 people, on the east coast of the USA, where most of the people were very religious and scared of technology. At that time only a few households in my neighborhood had a computer, but only 1 or 2 had the internet. My parents and I spent night at our next door neighbor's house. They had the internet and were avid hunters who had gone through the hassle of getting extra food and supplies just in case. My neighbors had 2 teenage boys. We were gathered in their basement to watch the ball drop on TV, and right at the stroke of midnight one of the teenage boys snuck over to the circuit breaker and cut the power for the house. The next minute or so was just sheer panic from the adults. I just sat there not fully understanding what was going on. Of course they had flashlights on hand, and the teenager who cut the power was quickly found sitting underneath the circuit breaker giggling like a little girl. The giggles quickly turned to fear as his parents started shrieking at him and giving him a whopping. I am from the rural Midwest. Looking back at my childhood, you would think I grew up in the 1970s and not the 90s because of how country my hometown was. My family didn't really understand Y2K, but they bought into the hype. A lot of religious people were twisting the whole thing into an apocalyptic type of thing. I was a kid and it scared me. I dreaded New Year's Eve, because I was worried that was when the world would end. A few days prior, a low-flying aircraft of some kind flew over the family farm. It was so loud and must have been going fast because there was a sound that may have been a sonic boom. I was outside with my grandpa and I ran inside at the sound, hid under the kitchen table and started bawling. My grandpa fished me out from the table and I told him why I was so scared. He and I rang in the New Year's together that year so he could show me that everything would be fine. We were in high school. Had a huge group of friends, 30 plus, that spent New Year's at one of my friend's parents' house. We were doing the countdown. Everyone was nervous from all the hype that computers were not going to be able to calculate the date correctly and revert to 1900, shutting down vital city systems. Internet and computers were just beginning to take over managing everything. For reference, I had a beeper in high school, guys. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The entire house goes completely dark. Silence. Friend dad comes upstairs, looks at our scared faces and starts his ass off, slapping his legs and doubling over with humor. Can't catch his breath. He flipped the breaker. Lights back, come on. Happy Y2K everyone. It was perfect. Cool dad. I got up at 3 AM to check if the world had ended. It had not, so I went back to bed. This is my favorite one. I'm a firefighter and was working on the Y2K night. Right at midnight, all of our primary radio and CAD systems failed. It was a huge, system-wide failure, just like everybody predicted would happen. We were getting dispatched by backup radios and our dispatchers were writing down calls on pieces of paper. The suck is that my engine company had the first call of the year, but we didn't get credit for it because of the confusion. When they put calls into the computer after it was fixed, we ended up with call 00013. Duck you engine 3, we were first. Sincerely, E12. An ad manager was fired somewhere. I guarantee it. My dad had been paid quite a bit over the previous year, as he was a COBOL programmer 20-30 years before, and it was mostly COBOL programs that people worried about. The panic helped increase his wage. A lot of stuff did end up getting fixed, which is why things didn't go as badly as predicted. He didn't work at all this century. Part of it was that he had made enough that he could stop working. But I think a large part was that he developed an inflated sense of what his skills were worth over those few years, and has never been offered anything close since. New Year's Eve itself I had a very bad cold. I spent most of the night huddled in my bed. At midnight I went across the street for half an hour. Some friends had gotten the key to the roof of the engineering building, the Wahlberg building, and we went up there to watch the fireworks. Cobble. Now there is a name I haven't heard in a long time. Lived in a house in the middle of the boonies with my friends shortly after high school. This house was owned by a survivalist software engineer who said we could live there rent-free on the condition that we all go through survivalist training by a high-ranking Marine officer at his own expense. This was him initiating a small group of go-getters who would help him recreate society after the apocalypse, which was inevitably coming, most likely with a Y2K societal collapse. I learned how to navigate and triangulate with and without map and compass, lead a group of civilian soldiers, and shoot a Colt 45. By the end of training, I could assemble and disassemble it in a minute and 7 seconds blindfolded. The peak of our training was when my best friend and I, both female, took down a line of cans at 30 yards from the outside in, one starting on the left and the other starting on the right, in complete tandem, hitting the middle one simultaneously. The man who trained us was gushing with pride that day. New Year's came around. We sat by the fire, took some acid and contemplated what was next for our lives. I grew up in rural Tennessee, and my neighbors at the end of the road were a legit militia. Like, they had built a bunch of bunkers and stockpiled food and fuel and weapons, and went out in the woods on training exercises. Through the Clinton administration, they were mostly preparing for a New World Order black helicopter Hillary Clinton takeover type scenario. But Y2K really meshed with their worldview. They offered to let my neighbor, a machinist and welder, join their crew, but I guess they didn't have much use for my family. In October, we got a misdelivered Xerox newsletter in the mail. It was totally creepy. Full of helpful tips for setting up your own little warlord dom after Y2K. How to subjugate the population, set up roadblocks around your fiefdom, getting the most out of your serfs once civilization fell, building alliances with your neighboring warlords. My machinist neighbor, who always had some shady characters hanging around his place, told the militia he'd be fine and went and bought a machine gun. After New Year's, we didn't see the militia much. Their leader died a few months later, which was really a shame, because 9/11 would have been right up his alley. Not really a good story. Or a story, really. But I used to read the hip-hop magazine, The Source, and I remember they had an issue on Y2G, as they called it, year 2 grand, I guess. It was pretty cringy. It had Jay-Z in some weird, metallic, futuristic clothing and some backup dancers with spiky hair on the cover. Have to find this now. I'm going to kick this off by sharing my own. I used to work for a small business that was owned by 2 evangelical Christians. They were quite pushy with their beliefs, and one of those beliefs was that the 1st of January 2000 was the day of the rapture. Daily, I would have to endure them loudly talking to each other about how everyone needs to be ready. Everyone. Then they would ask me what my plans were. I would do my best not to engage. I noticed they stopped making the schedule past New Year's Eve. The schedule was simply blank. When I asked why, they told me it was because they wouldn't be there. They would be with Jesus, and I still had time to be saved. To be clear, I never stated what my faith was when I worked for them. My mother always said that you never talk about politics, religion, money, or anyone's weight in polite company. I just knew that no matter what my answer was, it would be wrong. They just knew I didn't attend their church, which to them, was the only valid church. Therefore, I was going to hell. It was a Southern Baptist church, in case you were curious. The 2nd of January was interesting. I had to call the shop to ask if I was supposed to work that day. The bosses were in a shitty mood. One was frantically setting the schedule for the month and the other was ordering business supplies. Yeah, we were out of a lot of our regular stuff because they felt there was no need to restock. I wanted so badly to ask why they weren't taken in the rapture. I had endured months of belligerence from them over this topic. I always politely sidestepped the question, just saying that as far as I knew, Mankind cannot predict or declare the day of the rapture. One of them was hateful about it and the other was increasingly worried I would be left behind for all the bad stuff that would follow. I felt kind of bad for them in a way. They had been preparing for this for months. I wouldn't have been surprised if they gave things away, but I didn't dare ask. I ended up leaving that job by the end of the month for unrelated reasons. It was a really bad place to work all around and I've never gone back since. We're now closer to 2038, which will be when the real computer date fun will happen. Oh shoot. You're right. Does anyone know why they picked that date? It wasn't picked. It's simply when the capacity of 32-bit data types typically used for daytime storage on Unix systems will overflow. The animation at the top of Wikipedia illustrates it quite nicely. So we have about 18 years to make sure that all of our stuff is running with 64-bit versions of their date libraries, which is basically impossible because there are so many more connected systems out there today than there were 20 years ago. Think of all the odd stuff that never gets updated alone. Happy Cake Day, by the way. Oh, you made it this far? We really hope you enjoyed. You're amazing. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe for more amazing internet content. Yeet Fleet forever.